Well, many Canadians were outraged after Bombardier's executives received nearly a 50% raise plus bonuses after the company received a government loan. That bonus was then postponed, but this is not the first time Ottawa has stepped in to support the private sector. Air Canada and CN Rail are both companies who've also received taxpayer-funded bonuses at some point, and this is a strategy that has other countries increasingly embracing. So joining us to talk about why this happens is Marvin Ryder. He's an assistant professor of marketing at McMaster University. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, first of all, explain to us, how does the government decide which private companies to give these loans to?
So every time we have an election, whether it's provincial or federal, those leaders talk about trying to create jobs. And so their first priority is that since the government itself can't create jobs, how do I stimulate the private sector? So they look at three different formulas. One is a subsidy, one is a loan, and one is an actual investment in private sector companies to either protect the jobs that we have or to get more jobs. They don't just do it for anybody. So if you're a retail store, you're out of luck. There was no bailout for Target, if you can remember its challenges. Instead, they have targeted strategic areas, usually spelled out in a budget. And in the most recent federal budget, Minister Mulroney said there were 6 of these areas. They are a bit jargony, if you don't mind me saying it like this. Clean technology, clean resources, digital technology, advanced manufacturing, agri-food, and biosciences. If you're in one of those areas, you may very well be entitled to some government money.
Well, the language may sound clean, but the frustration still remains. And that is, I think people feel like, you know, if I hired somebody to do something around my house, or if I ordered something and it didn't arrive on time, it was late consistency, I wouldn't award them with a tax-free loan. So are we creating an environment for these big companies where there's no risk associated with their failure?
Right, that's always the concern here. And so I think there's a couple of things that goes on with the government. On one hand, for Bombardier, for instance, Bombardier asked the federal government for a $1 billion loan in 2015. They waited until 2017. This is the federal government waited until 2017. And then when they did decide to give Bombardier a loan, it was for $372.5 million. Now, I know that's a lot of money, but it's a lot less than what Bombardier asked. I think the government was looking for various safeguards and assurances. Was this money really needed? Are you really turning the corner? Are you really making a progress? And so with those assurances, that's when they decided to give them the money. A big Canadian failure a few years ago was Northern Telecom. I'm sure it asked for bailout money, and there the government said, we're not convinced that there's enough of a turnaround strategy in place. We're not going to throw good money after bad.
What's behind the decision to make this a tax-free loan? You know, why not put some taxes, apply it to there so that there feels like there's some incentive to do well, to do better?
Right. So let me just call it slightly, it's not tax-free, it's interest-free, that they're not going to be charged interest on this. This, again, is a way a government can say, look, this is a strategic area for us. So particularly with Bombardier, we're talking about both the streetcar part of the business as well as the airplane part of the division. Bombardier is the only airplane manufacturer in Canada. This is important to the government that we keep some sort of presence in this aerospace industry. So this is their vote of confidence. Now, I'm not sure it would have been interest-free, except interest rates for the government is down on the order of 2.5%. If you subsidized it down to 1.5%, it doesn't make that much of a difference. I think if interest rates were at 10%, you'd never have seen an interest-free loan at this point.
All right, are there any conditions in place to ensure that government loans could help save Canadian jobs rather than what we saw with Bombardier when jobs were cut?
Right. So it all depends upon the kind of financing. When you put equity into the company, you actually get a seat at the board table. So the Quebec government did not loan Bombardier money. It invested $1 billion in Bombardier. And in exchange for that, they have a seat at the board table where they get to shape policy and direction. When I loan money, usually the covenants are in protection of the loan to make sure I get repaid. So no, there aren't very many covenants at that point about maintaining jobs. And in fact, sometimes cutting jobs is part of the plan to go forward. I'm sure the government would have known that there was going to be some kind of a downsizing, that their money was going towards other aspects, but this full package was what was going to keep Bombardier solvent and going forward.
And Canada is not alone in this strategy. This is something we're seeing right around the world.
It's something that actually we've seen for more than 5 decades. In the case of China, there is no truly independent business. Every business has got the government involved in one way or another. Every business in China is considered to be strategic. As we see in the United States, it is not unusual for states to get involved in financing businesses. The federal government gets involved, and even in Europe we see this. On one hand, that's a source of complaint. Brazil has an aircraft company called Embraer. They're complaining that the subsidies and support to Bombardier are not fair, but then at the same time, if you don't do it and you're facing other nations that do, you're putting your companies at a competitive disadvantage in the world market space. The bottom line for government is trying to find a balancing act. What's the right level of support? There can be too much, there can be too little. How can they find that sweet middle ground and all of that?
All right, Marvin Ryder joining us from Hamilton, Ontario, from the Hammer this morning. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.